Is the Odyssey the greatest adventure story of all time? Filmmaker Christopher Nolan and his cast just described this epic of Homer, the ultimate adventure story. Literary scholars and classicists routinely group the Odyssey among classical adventure literature. In the dictionary, lexicographers, major dictionaries, formally define the Odyssey as a long adventurous journey filled with notable experiences and hardships, and they pull this definition directly from Homer's poem. And that's pretty much the cultural consensus. I have myself said that the Odyssey is an epic and as such a long narrative poem focused on a hero with various other features. But if we left it at that, we would be treating the epic of Homer in a very superficial fashion. And we would be neglecting the greater matters of Homer's Odyssey while observing things that are formally correct, but relatively insignificant. And I mean that even in terms of the adventure story. It is not the adventure story of the Odyssey that makes the Odyssey the great book that it is. It is the fact that it is the world's first education manual. It was used to teach the Greeks. Homer himself was cited by none other than Socrates in Plato's Republic in Book 10, and he called Homer, I believe, the educator of Hellas. This is the term that was used commonly in the day by all the Greeks. Aristotle called Homer the teacher and used his Iliad and his Odyssey as illustrations of characterization and of narrative and even of cultural order. He was the exemplum for that. Similarly, the sophists and the rhapsodes, professional poetry reciters and rhetoricians, were heavily influenced by Homer's works. And they cited him as the ultimate source of knowledge for human affairs and governance and morality. And Socrates, the great rhetorician, regarded Homer's epics as the foundational text for civic education and for ethics. So essentially, the idea that Homer is the teacher of all Greece is not just the opinion of Plato or isolated figures. It was the consensus among all Greeks. So we cannot simply regard it as a grand adventure story or even the greatest adventure story and understand the epic properly. That's my first point. The second point is, if it is about education, what is the form of education that it promotes? Is it of knowledge? Education in the modern day is intensely connected with knowledge. In fact, many think that we're in the knowledge business if we are educators. But Homer's form of education is very particular. It is a psychagogy. This is a word that's no longer used, but a psychagogy is effectively a journey of the soul. And Plato's notion of the soul, Homer's notion of the soul, can't be reduced to Descartes' notion of a mind, something that understands merely. The soul of the Greeks contains passions, appetites, spirit, as well as reason or logos. It's a more holistic sense. It involves parts of us that the mind simply doesn't include. And so the training or the journey of the soul makes us look at Odysseus's ventures in a slightly different way, and in fact, an entirely different way. Because in his battles against monsters, in his striving to come home and confront the suitors, what we need to do is read this story on two levels. Of course, it is the adventure story of Odysseus fighting mythological creatures. Everyone sees that. And the film that Nolan's about to bring out will doubtless emphasize that, as one would expect in a visual medium. But there is simultaneously an aspect which I think is going to be left out of this idea of a grand adventure story, which is that there is a battle against the bad parts of the soul, the bad parts of human nature, specifically our enthralled appetites and our unbridled desires, the appetites that when we give into, turn us into swine, just as we see in the episode with Circe, or those that aspire above our station and will result in us self-glorifying ourselves and living for our own praise, as we see in the episode of the Sirens. These two temptations of the soul are to think see ourselves less than human or more than human, but these are nonetheless spiritual desires. And what we see in these temptations then, is a man forming his desires in the face of various temptations, rather than encountering things that he has to encounter intellectually and understand. It's not a journey of understanding, even though it's an education book. It's a journey of soul formation. And so let me talk about this in 7 different ways that I think we'll see there are significant overlaps between Homer's Odyssey and Plato's Republic. Plato's Republic, which was revered by Cicero, among others. He wrote De Officiis and so forth, and various other works, all of which made the Greeks the founders of the Western intellectual tradition. So when I'm speaking here of Homer, I want to demonstrate that his concerns are the same as Plato's, and Plato's are those of the whole Western philosophical and intellectual tradition. So the first conflict that we'll see, I've already mentioned the conflict between appetite and reason. The question that Homer poses to us is, can a man govern his desires? Odysseus faces this question in every major episode. In the episode with the Lotus Eaters, with Circe, with Calypso, with the Sirens, with the cattle of Helios. These aren't just random adventures. Each asks whether appetite and a form of appetite for something in particular will overrule his reason. And Plato makes exactly the same issue the center of the Republic, Book 4, but he, instead of speaking of monsters, talks of psychological aspects or aspects of human nature. So he speaks of the logos, the thumos, or the epithumia, the mind, the spirited element, and the passions, or the appetites. So Homer explains narratively what Plato explains psychologically and in abstraction through terms. Second feature in common is an interest in education. Note that the Odyssey begins not with Odysseus, the hero, but rather with his son Telemachus. How come? Because Homer first asks, how does a boy become a man? What does it mean to be a man? And in this, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, in the guise of mentor, an old man, a wise old man, becomes his guide. And later on, Nestor and Menelaus will become exemplars of the same sort of guidance. And the entire Telemachy, the first 4 books of the Odyssey, concern education through imitation. So Plato transforms this focus on education, which is quite clear in Homer's Odyssey, into one of the central questions of the Republic. What stories should children hear? He asks that in books 2 and 3. And the famous censorship that Plato proposes in these books only makes sense because Plato believes that poetry does form the soul. And in this, he would be sharing the opinion of all Greeks. Poetry educates, at least in Homer's representation of it. Thirdly, a concern with justice. The climax of the Odyssey makes it suggest that justice is far from Homer's interest. It seems very bloody. And modern readers will often ask the question, why do the suitors all have to die? Why is it merciless? And the answer is because Homer, up to this point in the narrative, has stressed and demonstrated that the suitors have violated the sacred realm of hospitality. They have violated marriage, or sought to do. They have violated kingship. They have violated godly sacrifice. They have violated Odysseus's property rights, and they have shown irreverence toward the gods in the process. So when judgment comes, it is the restoration of moral order. That's what Homer is displaying to us. Now, Plato is concerned with the exact same question. In the Republic, he asks a philosophical version of the same question. What is justice? Rather than narrating it, he defines it. Fourthly, in the realm of rule or kingship, Odysseus, note, succeeds in being the wise king that Homer presents to us as the moral exemplar, not because he is the strongest. Ajax is stronger than he. Achilles is clearly stronger than he. But that's not why Odysseus gets home. Odysseus succeeds because he learns wisdom. He learns prudence. He learns patience. He learns temperance. And so then the question that becomes in the Odyssey, what makes someone fit to rule and to be a good ruler? Now, Plato's Philosopher King gives us the same answer. Wisdom is the essence of true power administration. Fifthly, the homecoming. Homer uses the word Nostos. For Homer, Nostos, or coming home, means the restoration of self. Odysseus is a broken man when we encounter him. He's going to restore parts of himself as he journeys back. It means the restoration of household, the restoration of marriage, the restoration of kingdom, the restoration of godly sacrifice. Plato deals with the very same question, but he deals with it in abstraction, the way a philosopher does. He asks the question, what is the rightly ordered soul? And the Republic ends where the Odyssey does, with order restored. The one has it in the terms of a kingdom, the other in terms of an abstraction, idealized version. Sixthly, both Homer and Plato are concerned with the issue of appearance versus reality. Note that half of the epic, when he returns home to Ithaca, Odysseus spends his time disguised. The points of recognition only come through memory, through fidelity, through testing, and through truth. Plato deals with the same idea of appearance and reality by asking questions. What's the difference between seeming and being? In Book 2 of the Republic, The Ring of Gyges asks this question philosophically, Homer's question. In Book 7, The Allegory of the Cave, the same question is asked epistemologically. Finally, and most importantly in terms of the highest good, the deepest connection probably lies here. The Odyssey asks us, what is human life ultimately for? The answer that Homer provides, it's not wealth, it's not pleasure, it's not even Achilles' glory. It's a rightly ordered life, lived within the realm of the family, within a just city, and under the gods' tutelage and administration. Now, Plato radicalized and abstracts the same question in the Republic. The goal of coming home and the highest good is not simply to return to Ithaca. The highest good is good itself. The journey home, in other words, becomes an ascent of the soul. Now, I believe that Homer is depicting the very same ascent of the soul, but his soul is given passions, and it becomes a matter of forming the passions. And it's seen from below in much the same way Aristotle looks at human nature, so does Homer. In summary, Homer educates through narrative. Plato explains philosophically what Homer's already taught imaginatively. And whereas the Odyssey forms the soul by story, the Republic analyzes the structure of the soul that Homer has been forming all along. I'll conclude with that. If the Odyssey is more than an adventure, even a grand adventure, even the greatest adventure, and if it is one of the great books that forms Western civilization, then there's much more to discover. At Paideia today, I'm trying to recover the Western tradition, not as a museum piece, but as a living source of wisdom for our own time. If that's a journey you'd like to take with me, subscribe to my YouTube channel, join me on my Substack, it's listed in the link below, where I publish essays and resources exploring literature, philosophy, Christian thought. Or if you're really interested, you might want to apply to the Paideia Fellowship, a guided series of weekly seminars that explore the Western tradition by looking at the great books. We'll run that on a sort of a semester type basis. You'll have to apply, link down below. And finally, I've produced an entire teaching series now on the Odyssey, which you might be interested in. The link below again. But above all, and this is a free gift if you're interested in, it's a visual companion to the Odyssey outlining many of the same things that I have just outlined for you here. I thought you might be interested in that. And if you are, link is down below and click on that. Thank you.